Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Newseum. I'm Jan Newhart, the Chair and Chief Executive Officer of the Freedom Forum. It is a pleasure to welcome you to Shifting the Power, the latest program in the Freedom Forum Institute's Power Shift Project, which is an initiative launched earlier this year to improve the quality and future of journalism by improving the diversity, equality, and culture of news organizations. Today, we'll hear from leaders of three major media organizations, Dow Jones, Politico, and NPR, who will discuss their innovative initiatives to create safer, more inclusive, and diverse workplaces. In different ways, these organizations are shaking up newsroom diversity, developing peer support groups, and creating cultures of intentional inclusion. We'll start off today's program by sharing with you details of our own workplace integrity training curriculum. This is a custom-tailored curriculum for media organizations and is designed to advance the goal of workplaces free of harassment, discrimination, and incivility, and full of opportunity, especially for those who have traditionally been denied it. We held our first training session last month, featuring nearly 40 newsroom leaders who left the two-day session informed, inspired, and ready to lead the training in their own organizations. We're looking forward to an important conversation today about some of the solutions that hold promise for creating meaningful change in our newsrooms and media workplaces. And now I'll turn it over to Kathy Trost, the Executive Director of the Freedom Forum Institute. Kathy?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. And I just want to also tell you that besides the important conversation in the room today, it's going to go outside of these walls. We're live streaming. We're also creating some video productions off of this that will be shared widely on social, in which we'd love to share with your teams too, to spread the word. We never want things to stay in one room. We want them to break the walls and get through to all the many people we know that couldn't be here today, because what the most important thing we want to talk about is that we all want to be part of the solution. That's what led us to form this project here at the Freedom Forum Institute. We want to be the change that we want to see, and in order to understand what some of the solutions are, we need to hear from people in the field who are testing them. And we're not expecting that any of these are the answers, and we want to make really clear that this is a conversation where we're all beginning to think about ways that can be, that maybe these all should be in our toolkits, maybe not, depends on your culture, depends on your organization. But if we don't talk about them and share them, no one's going to know what's working and what's good. And that's one of the huge goals of our project, is to be a clearinghouse for ideas that are innovative, that are effective, and that make a change. And to start off, we're going to, in Pride of Place, we're going to talk about what we're doing first. But Jill Geisler is our Freedom Forum Institute Fellow in Women's Leadership, and also the Loyola University Chicago Bill Plant Chair in Media and Leadership Integrity. I should know this by now, Jill.
I have to get a shorter title. Leadership and Media Integrity.
Leadership and Media Integrity. She's a phenomenal world-class trainer. And what we asked her to do, because what we heard at the Power Shift Summit last winter, was that training was really important, but not the kind that we'd been doing, really. The sort of anti-harassment compliance training wasn't as effective as it needed to be. That, and we know this from the EEOC and the National Women's Law Center and others, that really good training needs to be customized to your culture. Journalists are going to immediately smell a rat if it doesn't seem right for their culture, right? It needs to be journalists speaking to journalists in the training, and it needs to be, well, Jill's going to tell you all about it. And we've already graduated our first class of trainers, and we're going to be spreading this far and wide. So let's start off.
Jan already said these words, and the words are important, and I tease now about the fact that I don't need to look at the board to be able to tell you that workplace integrity is defined as environments free of harassment, discrimination, and incivility, and filled with opportunity, especially for those who've traditionally been denied it. And that sounds so simple, but let's face it, that's what we're all working toward. And so when we heard that, when we took that away from the Power Shift Summit, that you couldn't separate harassment from discrimination, and incivility was the gateway to it all, then how could we put together training that respected the wisdom that exists in a lot of news organizations and treated adult learners as adult learners, but turned training into something that they could talk about, that they could own. And so the three pillars of the design that I put together for us were three things. Number one was critical thinking. Taking apart the ideas that sometimes cause us to make some perhaps flawed decisions. So if you have a statement, for example, that simply says, HR looks out for the company and not you, and you've heard people say it, we heard it at the summit. Well, it may be a truth in some person's life, but it also is a falsehood in many organizations. And from a critical thinking standpoint, well, how do we address that statement? How do we analyze it for where we live? Or if you heard a statement that said something like, well, if they don't want to get hit on, why do they come to work dressed like they're going to a party? And we have to say to ourselves, okay, maybe I've heard somebody say that, and maybe it is true that we have to talk about how people dress professionally for work. But did we just embed in that an excuse for harassment? Did we just blame a victim? And if you put a list of statements like that out there and turn it over to people who are really smart and let them take them apart and let them offer alternatives, what you find is they don't feel like they've been lectured to. They're having a great time doing what journalists love to do, which is to question authority, resist spin, and look for truth. So when we did this training, we had some terrific people with us. There's Shirley Carswell, who's now an educator at Howard, I think in the room right there, Shirley, talking to Candy Altman, who is just retired as VP at the Hearst television stations, both of whom not only are leaders in their own organizations, but who are being trained by us to be available to go into other organizations to train. Oh, look, and there's Sharon Masley. It's like we have the EEOC or a volunteer on her own time, actually. Sharon makes sure there's a division between her formal role in the EEOC, where we come to her for advice, and her volunteer work, where she takes a day off just to come in as an expert in this field and be a part of it. And frankly, to evaluate our training. And so far, she says that we might be doing something okay. Is that fair to say? And CBS represented as well. And that's the first graduating class. But I want to go back to that curriculum. The second part, after we talk about the critical thinking, is courageous conversations. For as long as I've been teaching newsroom managers, and it's been a long time when I did that both for the Poynter Institute and now in my current role at Loyola University, what I know is that the session that's in most demand is how do you have tough conversations? Nobody trains you for those. You know, you were good at something in your career and then they made you a manager. Well, we're good at something in anything that we do, and then we run up against bullying, harassment, incivility. And what if we aren't a manager? What if it is our manager who's doing that? What if we're the intern? What if we're the newest woman in the organization? What if we're a person of color? What if we're gay, lesbian, transgender? What if we are a person who feels as though we don't have an ally? Where do we find the words? How do we deal with those situations? So we created 5 case studies that cross all of those areas, and we gave people the chance to, in the training, to experience that. And the 5 are just the first case studies. We're creating others that represent different situations, student situations, for example. And then we give people the tools to have those tough conversations and to practice them. And it turns out to be probably as important as any other thing that we do. And I've watched now in a couple of cases of people roll it out and try it. Yesterday, we did it here at the Newseum because they believe in walking their talk, so we train top managers here. And they did those tough conversations. And we learned a lot from what their experiences were. And then the third pillar is a culture of respect and trust. And in that part of it, we move from the things that we don't want to have happen to the way that we do want to live. And the people in the workshop get a chance to create their own culture. But for every idea they come up with, they have to fill in what I would do personally, what we as a team would do together, and what are some things that only our organization can do to support us. And as it turns out, if you're afraid that every situation like this ends up with people saying, here's what everybody else ought to do, you'll discover that using the framework that we have, people take responsibility. That most of the work turns out to be my work and our work, not somebody else's work. And the form that we have for doing that lets their voices lead. And that's really important in any kind of adult learning, whether it's journalists, who we all know, as I say, if they're any good, when we hire them, they question authority and resist spin. And then we want them to respect our authority and follow what we say. That doesn't work well. But in this curriculum, it's designed to allow them to have their voices. The goal is workplace integrity, environments free of harassment, discrimination, and incivility, and filled with opportunity, especially for those who've traditionally been denied it. So that is the workplace integrity curriculum. We're starting out with 33 trainers, 33 people who went through the first training. We will do 2 more trainings this year. We're hoping to look for beta organizations that not only want to have trainers, but then want to do practice rolling it out in that organization. And with the good advice of our advisory board, we would like to do that so that we can do some type of pre and post survey. You know, how are you feeling about that particular claim? You know, on a scale of 1 to 10, how do we feel about this right now? How might we feel about it immediately after the training, or maybe 6 months later, or maybe a year? Because in truth, we've got to prove that there's value to what we do. We all want to do the right thing. We just need to know how to do it the right way with the right people so that it lasts. Thank you.
Part of this, for every session that we do, we really want to have a conversation with you, and we've got mics that'll run out, so raise your hand if you've got a question. You know, particularly about the training, about anything else that we're doing at the project. But to start it off, I wanted to ask you, you know, there's a lot of resistance. Newsrooms are busy places, and this training takes at least 6 hours probably to get all of the important points across. What are some of the challenges that you think that we're going to face, and we'd like to hear from you about embedding this important training. Also, maybe we can hear from Sharon and Mary Fran, who took the training, were graduates of the first class, right? And how you feel, what kind of impact it had, and whether it's something that is going to be important in the field. Maybe you want to run a mic over to...
Well, while you're doing that, let me just say the most important thing in any training, whether it's 6 hours or 2 hours, is what kind of food are you serving.
Yeah.
And so, so for 6 hours, you really need a good lunch. But what's really important is I'm invited into many, many organizations to do training. And it usually isn't a 2-hour training. If somebody wants me to come in for an hour, I don't think that they're really interested in much, unless it's part of a deeper day-long program that they have with many other facets of their organization. So I think the key to this is to make people aware of what the goal is and what the potential is, and to frankly let it sell itself on the quality. 6 hours is a morning and half of an afternoon, okay, and a good lunch.
So just to talk about, so I'm Sharon Thomas and Mary Fran Tyler at NPR, and so we came to do the training that day, which was really great. I think given what this program was born out of, I think, in the last year with Me Too and harassment issues, but I think the crux of it being focused on really just having a workplace of integrity, what that looks like, that's something everybody can get behind, and I think that was core, and finding values is one of the aspects of the training was, what are some common values and goals that, in mixed teams that you can all get behind. So I thought for us and our organization, where we've had a lot of conversation and a lot of work over the last year in these areas and discovering things about ourselves, that it's definitely something that we've passed along to others at NPR. They're interested, and I think, doing whether it's 6 hours, is a worthwhile endeavor, and we just figure out how to make it work within the company. So people are excited.
I will say that even using the term training troubles me a little bit, because we aren't training people. We are setting the table for conversations that people don't normally have in the workplace. And that's what people really enjoy. It's a chance to talk about values. It's a chance to say, what do I do in a situation like this? Because a lot of the problems that have existed happened because people thought they couldn't talk about these things. But you have to figure out a safe way that doesn't have people feel like they've been attacked in the room, that men are as welcome in this conversation as women, and that it is not about just straight white women, but that there is an issue that transcends all of our individual identities, and it all relates to how do we bring our best selves to work? How do we feel encouraged? And how, if managers do have to tell us we're not doing a good job for some reason, we know it's because we weren't doing a good job. It's not because we were women or young or gay. It's because we've learned how to talk to each other honestly, both positively and negatively.
Another point that struck me was there's a prequel to harassment and misconduct, and it's called bullying, anger, incivility, a lot of stuff that's just gone with the territory in newsrooms for years, right? Or we thought it was important. In this workplace workshop, there's a lot of talk about how do you create cultures of respect and trust that are also creative and do great journalism. So that's an important piece of this too.
Right, and this is not, there is no list of do's and don'ts in this training. There is a conversation in which people aspire. The third part of it, the culture of respect and trust, lets them say, so what do we owe each other? What are the values that we're going to bring? What are the assumptions we're going to have? And it's so interesting because they design it. And I have not yet had one person say, well, I really want a culture in which I can tear somebody apart if I don't like their work today. And I think we have gotten past the point in which we say your passion for journalism forgives your cruelty to others when they underperform, in your opinion.
Right.
Hi there. Do you find that women are more interested in doing the training than men? I mean, I hear what you're saying, that it's inclusive, but is it resonating more with women?
Look at the group picture.
But that was it. We have to admit that was by invitation. And we have felt all along in this project that it was important to have the voices of women, but also of really good men who also want to be a part of it. But it's unsurprising that the beginnings of it were, we invited a lot of women who showed up at the Power Shift Summit. And that invitation, as Alicia Shepard, who's here, helped put together, was intentionally women and some men. I think Mary Fran had something.
I'm Mary Fran Tyler from NPR. To go back to the training, I would say that the critical thinking and the values sharing, as well as the experiential piece of it, was incredibly valuable. But the other piece that was fascinating to me is that this is applicable not just for newsrooms, but across media organizations, and frankly across all types of organizations, because these issues are cropping up in various places in different organizations. So I think it's worthwhile for the entire employee base.
And since you're not in the newsroom, I take that real seriously.
I am a recovering journalist, so I've worked both in the newsroom, but now I'm on the business side, so I've seen it from a little bit of each.
Thank you.
So brazen advertisement, we have 2 workshops coming up September and November for Train the Trainers. If there are people you know who want to become trainers in their own organizations. And we also are creating a Go team of trainers who will be able to come in to under-resourced newsrooms, or they have too many folks to train. So stay tuned or reach out to us for information on that. And I think, go ahead, Alyssa, did you have a question?
Yes, well, is this working? It just occurred to me, you were talking previously about going to different media organization forums or media forums around the country. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if you all could organize these kinds of trainings for freelancers at those organizations as well.
That's a really good plan. Elisa Liz-Munoz from the International Women's Media Foundation, something that we really take seriously, which is the fact that there are a whole bunch of unprotected people who don't even have organizational HR behind them. And yes, we want to do that. We just need to figure out the strategies.
And by the way, the conferences at which we're presenting, not this full training, obviously, because it's designed for a cohort of workers, but information from the power shift are organizations like the EIJ convention where freelancers attend, ASNE where freelancers attend, and even the ASNE Emerging Leaders programs. We've embedded it in that, and we've accepted freelancers to that. So we're not strictly dealing with just workplace, places where we're only reaching cohorts of media organizations.
ONA is in September. Are you already planning? ONA is in September. Are you already planning on doing something there? And if not, I'm going to be there the whole time if you need help
We should
doing
talk, because
something.
we're
That would be great.
EIJ and
She's
ASNE.
adjacent to it. And frankly, all of these were invitations. These were invitations extended to us. We didn't go out knocking on the door. I had not talked with ONA as yet, though. So we can put you to work.
So thank you, Jill. We're going to move on from this and bring up the great Dow Jones team, which is going to come up aboard. So we are so thrilled to hear about this new Ignite initiative at Dow Jones, which is really developed just in the past 7 or 8 months, correct? And we have a whole team here that's going to talk about different angles of it, but Meredith Lubitz, who's VP of Talent and Development for Dow Jones, is going to set the stage and set the conversation for us.
Thank you, Kathy. So I love the energy of this room. I feel like number one, what you just spoke about, I think is very apropos, particularly for the Igniters and Dow Jones as a whole. So very, very provocative, very timely. Today, I just want to talk to you a little bit about a program that we have launched and going into it very blind, I should say. In the spirit of full disclosure, I've been doing talent management for decades, and by far, it's the most profound, rewarding professional experience of my life to be part of this. So I get very choked up when I talk about this program, and I don't talk about it very often. I don't think words can describe the feeling that I feel to be a part of it. I've always considered my job in the world to bring humanity into the workplace. My background is in organizational psychology. And I feel as though after years of doing this, this is the first opportunity where it's really resonated, not only within the organization, but beyond these 4 walls at Dow Jones and the Wall Street Journal. So I needed to say that because I know I'd forget. That was very important for me. So Ignite. I want to talk a little bit about the genesis of Ignite and how it started. It's no surprise to this room the profound changes that are happening across the media landscape. And in order to innovate externally and to influence the world at large, we needed to create a similar population internally. So, about a year ago, the CEO made an announcement to the organization that we are going to tackle diversity and inclusion across the company through a number of different steps. One of which is to hire a Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer. Another was to take a look at gender. And that, I should say, is the starting point. It's not the destination, but certainly the starting point. So it's to take a look at the influencers and leaders of Dow Jones and the Wall Street Journal. And he basically gave us a task, and that was to reach 40% female senior representation across the various business units across the company. No timeline, but 40%. And the third thing that he announced was we were going to launch a female leadership development program. That was a surprise to me because the next day I saw him and I said, that's really interesting. When would you like me to start? So the next day I started forging ahead, and myself and the talent management team started building this experience. And it came very naturally. It was very poetic. It was a labor of love, quite frankly. And we wanted to create an experience that provided a platform for women to connect, innovate, and essentially inculcate the culture differently than had been done in the past. And I've worked at the company for 10 years, and much like many media organizations, you have a very non-collaborative news side, commercial side sentiment across the business. And I really wanted to make an intentional movement where people could get to know each other and support one another and do some profound things across the company. That's the goal. So we built this program, and it was, as you can imagine, a lot of interesting sentiment and feedback. Why women? Why not me? And I was clapping my hands thinking, well, this is the start. So this is just an invitation to do a lot more, but it needs to be successful. So I'm going to walk you through the program. It's still in its inception. We're 6 months in, and talk a little bit about the components that we wove into the program. And then you're going to hear the feedback from the team in terms of how it's resonated thus far. Okay, so I'm sorry I'm in your way. Just tell me to move. So it kicked off in February of 2018. And what we did was we took a global population. I should mention only 11 are from the newsroom. 14 of them are from the commercial side. Global representation across the company, different demographics. We wanted to make sure that we were choosing females that had a profound impact on the future success of the company. So we brought everyone together in February to New York. The first thing that was most important was creating trust and cohesion across the group. So we brought in these phenomenal expert coaches to lead a session, a day-long session on transformational leadership. Within 2 hours, a couple tears were shed. Just a couple. It was so mind-blowing to me to see people become raw and vulnerable within an hour or two of spending time with one another. We did some kind of hard skills training as well. We offered MBA in a day so that this cohort understood how to invest, how to divest, the profit and loss, levers that are important for the success of a company, and that was a lot of fun. Very interesting as well, the feedback around that. And then we had a lot of strategy talks. Things happen so quickly in our industry, and oftentimes you feel so behind the 8 ball in terms of what's happening and how things are shifting. So we heard from our CEO, we heard from our CEO, we heard all these different things around the levers of our business, our strategy moving forward, our roadmap, and the products, programs, progress of the company at large. And then there were a lot of lovely networking events so that they got to really, really understand one another. So that was the first week. And then ongoing development happens all the time. I don't know where they find the time to commit to this experience, but I do think for them it's also a labor of love. One of the things that we wove into the program were delivering Hogan assessments. And for those of you who aren't familiar with what they are, they're personality assessments. They're my favorite. So I administered 25 Hogan assessments, and it gave each individual a deeper understanding of their light, their dark, and their values. And it gave them a better understanding of how they communicate, how they decision make, how they interact with others, how they show up both personally and professionally. And with some, I've met with them and their executive sponsors and or managers to go through that and weave it into their ongoing development planning. Additionally, we have monthly meetups. So there we hear strategy discussions, we hear about the progress of the business. They each have an opportunity to talk about what they do and why it's integral to the company's success. And that's a really, really wonderful opportunity for skill building and networking. Additionally, wellness. Wellness, I believe there is no distinction between wellness and leadership development. I believe in order to show up as the best you can be, you need to be emotionally, mentally, spiritually, financially well. So wellness is a huge piece of it that we weave into the program over the course of the year, whether it be meditation, Shasna's favorite, or other things like Soul Cycle and things of that nature. So that's a critical piece. Coaching cohorts, so each of them are placed in a group of 4 to 5 others, and on a monthly basis, they work together and coach each other through some of their challenges. And they also create bold goals and indelible marks that they want to leave an imprint on over the course of the year and beyond. And executive sponsorship. That's probably one of the most important pieces of the success of this program. It is not an HR initiative, and that's critically important to sustain the success. It is essentially a cultural initiative. And I do believe that culture starts from leadership. So every executive at the company is actually sponsoring an Igniter. They spend anywhere between 2 to 4 hours a month with them, through job shadowing, through one-on-one mentoring discussions, through secondments, you name it, stretch assignments. So that's a critical piece in order to provide them with visibility, connectivity, and get them ready for bigger and larger roles in the future. Midpoint, we just came from a week of innovating. So not only is this a skill-building experience, but last week everyone came back to New York to work on a project that is going to basically leave a legacy for this cohort and change the way that we're doing business across the company. And I'll leave it to them to talk about it a little bit more, but it's how do we increase membership, readership, customer base across Dow Jones. And it was a really, really provocative week. At the end of the week, they got to present, some of which have never done so before, in front of our CEO, our executive panel, and it was live streamed across the company. So that was really, really interesting. And we have a capstone experience coming up in January. They're already emailing me, asking me what we're doing. And I want to leave a couple of surprises, but it is going to be really, really lovely. And we're going to infuse a few surprises into that experience. I just am so honored to be able to make it to the finish line with these guys. And actually, it doesn't stop then. They'll talk a little bit more about how they are also paying it forward. So, many of you might wonder, what does the application process look like? This is incredibly important, and for any of you that are running or thinking about running programs like this, I highly recommend this component. Oftentimes when you're running programs across a company, you're typically tapping people on the shoulder, right? And saying, I think that you would benefit from this experience. I vote for you. This was the first time I have been with a company where we've actually democratized the process. We've asked each person who is interested to raise their hand and apply. It wasn't easy. There was a huge barrier to entry. They had to take a video. They had to take a video of themselves and answer the questions, me and 3. Who am I? Why do I feel that me being part of this program would benefit the company? And what ideas do I have for the future success of Dow Jones and the Wall Street Journal? Many didn't apply as a result of the video. In addition to that, they needed 3 letters of recommendation from across the company. I personally sat down with the CEO and went through every single application. It was a really interesting exercise. 450 people were eligible to apply, and we landed with 25. Exceptional, exceptional. I'm humbled by each and every one of them to be a part of this program. It was not easy, as you can imagine, and we wanted to make sure that we had a fair representation from each of the different business units.
450 apply?
No, a little bit over 100. So this is just another example of how they're keeping the communication alive. So it is ongoing. There is an ongoing conversation. There's ongoing connectivity, ongoing cohesion. They use a Slack channel and only we are invited into the Slack channel. It's a private channel. They also have a WhatsApp channel as well. That's where the magic happens. I'm not even on the WhatsApp. Yeah. So, and it's great. So when they stumble into challenges across the workplace, they're there for each other. It's a really, really lovely way to keep the communication alive, particularly because it's a global initiative and they can't all be in the same space all the time together. So next, I just wanted to share with you a video. This video just encapsulates the first week and some of the feedback around their experience.
I learned so much during the very first day of Ignite that really carried me through each successive day.
I thought the curriculum and the program was kind of expertly designed. You know, we always go into programs like these not really knowing what to expect, but this was exceptional.
Having really immersive experiences, immersive days, and workshops was
fun, was informative, I think pushed a lot of people, me in particular, outside of my comfort zone, which I think was really helpful for kind of personal growth.
My expectations of the program going forward is that we will continue to come together as a group, hopefully on a very regular basis.
It's very important to set the tone for what we're doing.
If Dow Jones is lucky, this is going to become a real catalyst for change around the company.
Professionally, I think I'm going to get a much better understanding of the organization and where we're headed, and I get the opportunity to do that and go forward with an amazing group of women.
I'm looking forward to reuniting again with everybody and seeing the kind of progress we've made over the last few months. I'm really looking forward to hopefully have developed some extra skills through the coaching sessions and through the executive sponsorship.
You know, I'll be able to learn from all of the inspirational women around the world.
I hope to finish the year with a greater understanding of how we want to do things at this company, how we reach our strategic goals, how we filter some of those learnings back through the company to women who may make this scheme in the future, and to be a more effective leader.
Companies talk about initiatives like this being important, but this company actually took steps to make it happen. And at the highest level, all of the executives have been to every event. It feels like there's no lip service here. This is all action, and I'm so, so proud of that.
I think the fact that the company and our executive team are so committed with the program is very exciting. I don't think I realized it going in on how big of a commitment it is from them and from the company to invest in us, and it feels really good to be invested in.
I sort of came into the program thinking this was a great individual development opportunity for me personally. But what I've seen is that now I have this network that I can rely on, but also in speaking with Will Lewis and some of the other executives, this Ignite program is meant to be bigger than developing any one person. It's meant to be something meaningful and powerful for Dow Jones, and so I'm really excited about being able to participate in this group.
This was really life-changing, I have to say. It was just very inspiring to be with this amazing group of women who I now feel very close with. You know, they're my friends, and I feel like I have incredible access across the company now.
I think that there were a lot of connections forged. I think there were a lot of people that maybe didn't work together who now might have an opportunity to work together. So I think making those connections and having that network amongst those 25 women is a really powerful thing.
The women in the room all week are amazing. They're smart, they're energized, they're motivated, and just being in the room with them has been incredibly exciting. Can't wait to spend a whole year with these ladies.
I think something really special happened in our launch week in terms of gelling, and it was a process that happened every single day where there was a kind of a chemistry to it, and we got stronger and stronger as the week went on, and we're already in touch all the time now, and I think that's going to be really a force for change across this company and for women leadership and advocating for women and for diversity. And it's something that's concrete and tangible and real, and I think that's probably the most important thing about this program.
Let's just start with having you each introduce yourself and what you do, and tell the impact on you of this program.
Okay, shall I just talk for a few minutes then, and we'll do that? Okay, so my name is Granya McCarthy. I am an editor, senior editor in the journal Newsroom. I'm based in London. So I came in for the Ignite week last week, and I actually stayed through the weekend so I could come to this today. So that's kind of what we do on the Ignite. You get you get a bone and you can't get rid of it. So I've been at Dow Jones for, it seems like an absolute lifetime. I started when I was 12. I've been at the company for 20 years, and I think just to get to some of the diversity of the background of us Igniters, I've worked in 3 different continents for Dow Jones. I've started in Brussels, I was in Indonesia, I came to New York to study, did the Badgett Fellowship at Columbia. I was in New York for 10 years, and then I was bureau chief in Paris for 5 years during all of the madness there, terror attacks, etc., and now I'm based in London. So I want to talk a little bit about why I applied for Ignite. And Meredith talked about the process, and I remember I had this awful cough at the time, and the video was super stressing actually, because I could barely speak, and I had to kind of go through it a few times. But I was actually really struggling with whether I would go for it at all. I thought, I've been at this company for years. I am a leader in this newsroom. I know a bunch of women who are amazing leaders in our organization. Why do we have to do this? Like, what about the men? Do the men, is there going to be a training program for the men too? And I was actually struggling with it. And then one of my peers, Ellen Cherney, got in touch with me and she said, are you going for this? And I said, oh, I don't know. She's like, you should, I'll write you a letter of recommendation. And I said, all right, you know what, I'll do the same and I'll do it for you. But the reason I finally said I would do it was because of the generation coming up behind me. And we can talk a little bit more about this here. It's not just diversity, it's inclusion. And I felt I have to do this because I am a leader in the newsroom. I'm a working mother, you know, I do the juggle, and people look to me to blaze the trail. And I think a lot of Ignite is about blazing the trail. I just want to give a couple of quick stats on the state of our newsroom today. One of the other great things about Ignite was it just had a really good sense of timing. There was so much change going on across the industry. It was such a kind of or everyone's trying to figure out what the change is. Maybe we're not at the actual change part yet, but in our newsroom, we had been through a difficult year. We went through this 2020 process, like many in the media. We had to make some cuts. We had to make some painful decisions. And but one of the decisions that our leadership made, which was quite controversial really, I don't ever remember a company doing this, was we opened up the senior jobs at our organization in the newsroom. And if you were in that job, you had to reapply for it. So if you were the foreign editor or the page one editor or the national news editor, and you wanted to stay in your job, you had to apply for it. Everyone else in the company and externally could apply for your job too. So that's pretty challenging if you're in that job. We also created new jobs. We're all trying to get our digital strategy right, and so we came up with new positions. And people applied for them, and as a result of that, we did manage to shift the needle in a kind of a meaningful way, and many more of our newsroom leaders now are women. So we have gone from, I'm just going to give you this statistic, we have 52 journalists in the journal newsroom who, in what we call key news driving roles. So these are people who are senior editors and coverage chiefs. 42% of them are now women, of that 52, up from 29% in December 2016. So yes, we'd like it to be 50-50 and all that, or more maybe, but 45% of our news employees around the world are women, and 39% of the masthead is women. So Ignite started kind of when we were at the tail end of that process, so the sense of timing, there was momentum, was very important. And I think the journal is doing a lot of things now that are different, that are looking at how to kind of continue down this long road. I think Ignite, as you said, it's sort of in its infancy and it's already had a lot of impact, but I see this as a really long road. And so the point for me about inclusion is critical. So I come to the Ignite initial launch. I go back to London. One of my fellow Igniters is based in London. And so as a result of that, we decided to have monthly meetings with anybody. Whoever wants to come can come. They're very informal. The first one is about 40 women came, no men. The second one, there was maybe 50. We did a smaller. We thought we'd go more informal, a little bit more intimate. There was a few men came. So I think as we're getting along, the notion of inclusion is a good one because we're doing very well at the senior level in our organization, but sometimes it's the up and coming, it's the bench, who are our next generation of amazing women bureau chiefs, and how can we make sure that more women actually want to do those jobs, and how do we make sure that women want to do these finance jobs? So we can talk about a little bit more about that, but the last point I want to make, and I think the most compelling thing to me about Ignite, is the network. It really is so powerful. And when you're talking about the fact that 11 of us are from the newsroom, and we're all from the newsroom, meeting people on the other side of the company, it was like mind-blowing. The first day, I mean, I'm based in London. Commercial side and news side are in the same floor. There is the Chinese wall, and we're very strict about it. But I know a lot of people on the business side. But, you know, the first day when we were in that room, it was kind of like, you work for a different company. Like, the culture is like that on your side of the newsroom. That's on your side of the company. That's not what it's like in the newsroom, or vice versa. And it just broadens your horizons in ways that are unimaginable. And like I just said to these guys today, we're having lunch before we came here, so I'm going to call her out. Her name is Philippa Leighton-Jones, and she's our awesome colleague based in London. But I am based in London. I hadn't been there that long, but I didn't really know Philippa. You can be sitting next to someone every day and not know who they are. And what this does, it forces that conversation. You realize, wow, this person has all of those talents. I never knew that. Or, you know, we all work on a day-to-day basis with like workarounds. I'm sure you do that in all of your organizations. We all kind of know what the workarounds, and I sometimes think what it would be like if someone landed in that's new. Brent Jones is dealing a lot with helping people land in and make that transition. But like we can, you know, if you actually had people talk to each other and communicate with each other, that's where the magic happens. So it's really helped us to sort of make connections. So the network has been critical, and for me, the other thing has been the access that you mentioned. The access that we have had that has kind of just given us, you know, a buy-in and a say in so much that's going on around the company. It's just been amazing.
Yeah.
I'm going to hand off to my amazing colleague, Rocky.
Hi, you guys. First of all, how awesome is Meredith and how awesome is this program?
Yay!
Right?
She makes the magic happen.
Yeah. And just a shout out to Igniter Becky right
yes,
there.
Yes, we have another Igniter in the room.
I'm Rocky. I'm the editor-in-chief of a site called Moneyish at Dow Jones. I've been at Dow Jones for about 2 years, and previously I was a managing editor at the New York Daily News.
Shout out to them.
It's been a rough week for a lot of our friends at the Daily News, so anyone who's hiring, see me after. I know lots of great people. And before that, I was a columnist at the New York Post. So you asked about like our takeaway from this program. And for me, it's exactly what you said at the end, which is the network and then the access. The network is interesting, right? Because we're also encouraged all the time to network, go to networking things, meet people, and then you never turn around and you have no idea who the person next to you in the office is. It just like happens. The day goes by, you make the news, you cover, and then you just go home. And to spend time and to meet people who are from a completely different walk of life than you, who live in a different country, who cover a different part of the business, who've been around for longer than you have or shorter than you have, or who've gone from the business side to the newsroom, and to understand sort of like their walk and yours, and how when you kind of share a little bit of information with each other, how you can dramatically change a company. And that's what we're doing. We're 25 women on this program, and a year will go by, and there may not be like this huge tangible thing at the end, but I assure you that the work that we're doing together will change Dow Jones. And it's because Dow Jones has invested in us. Dow Jones has said that you guys, not only did you put yourselves forward, but you also have made a big effort to pass this forward to the women who work for you, the men who work for you, the other people in the newsroom. And for me, that's been really critical. Last week, we had this week away, and I had to leave my baby and my husband and like schlep to Princeton. Like, where is Princeton? And it was like, and I was like, how am I going to get the work done? And my deputy came back from maternity leave for a week, just so I could go, because that is how critically important this is for all of us. And I think being able to share that and to share sort of the amazing access and the things that we learn in this program with the rest of the newsroom has been really, really important for me. And also feeling like Dow Jones is a big company. I don't work in the Wall Street Journal newsroom. It's a little bit intimidating to just go upstairs and knock on a door, even for someone like me. But to know that I can email Anna Sedgley, the COO or the CFO or the CEO, which I have done, and they get back to you. And you can take an hour with them. I mean, how awesome is that? So that's sort of...
You need to share your story about the guy who wanted to be.
Yeah, oh my God.
So we made a deal
and then
before we came here that we would be...
Introduce yourself first.
Sorry, I'm Shazna Nessa. I have been at the Wall Street Journal for about 1.5 years. I am the global editor of visual journalism there. Prior to that, I worked at the Knight Foundation and actually worked very closely with the Newseum. I also, prior to that, worked with Jill a little bit, where I was a fellow at Stanford. And I worked at the Associated Press for a long time. I've worked at Condé Nast. I'm from London originally, and lived in Paris for 7 years, Miami, Palo Alto, back to New York. All to say, we're all very different. We all have very different backgrounds. I started my career in technology and design, and then got into journalism through that prism. So well, I'll get back to that thing. But one thing that has really resonated with me in this program is that diversity and inclusion, it's cheesy to say, but it comes in so many nuanced colors and shapes and sizes. And oftentimes I think of my own career and I think, okay, did that happen because I'm a woman? Did that happen because I'm brown? Did that happen because I have a British accent? Did that happen because I'm 5'2"? But the thing that resonates most with me is that most of my career in journalism has been at the margins because I came from technology. And innovation and change in newsrooms has been very disruptive. And some of us have always been at that margin because it was just the thing that we haven't been able to overcome. So regardless of whether I'm a woman or anything, it's just I've had to work even harder because that's not true, I exaggerate, but for a long time, I've had to fight and I've had to advocate for my teams, I've had to advocate for what I do, I've had to help the newsroom understand this is the path forward. And so I applied for Ignite and I was really happy to get in because I am fairly new at Dow Jones. I'm so intimidated and in awe of my colleagues who've had long careers there. Ignite has made me want to have a long career there. I would love to just keep investing in the time, in the people I'm working with, the people I'm advocating for. But it's also become an amazing
cohort.
It's an amazing place for me to be able to have a voice with the executive committee, with my senior leadership colleagues and my co-workers, that journalism is changing. That doesn't mean the ethics and our standards are changing, those remain the same, but the way we have to approach it, the way we think about our audience, the way we think about different forms of journalism, that has changed and we have to change along with it. So every opportunity I get, even if it's inappropriate, I'll get up on that box and I'll start saying, we gotta do this, we gotta do that. So last week, we had this innovation week where we went through a design thinking process and we broke out into groups and came up with rapid fire ideas and voted on them. And the idea I went in with was, of course, around, we gotta do this thing around different forms of journalism, different da-da-da. Unfortunately, mine didn't come top 3. I think I was number 15, but I take every opportunity I can. And then another thing about that 1 week period that was made me think about the word ambition. I think sometimes, at one point not too long ago, somebody said to me, Shazna, you're ambitious. I guess that's okay. And I thought, what does that mean? And I thought, well, I guess I am. But how would I say it? I probably would say things along the lines of, I can do more, I want to do more, I want to learn more, I'm underemployed, give me more. And ambition is not a dirty word, it's a great word. I also think of the phrase, raise your hand. It also feels like a really soft euphemism. We should be okay with the word ambition. And in this Innovation Week, we were doing a lot of work around our membership. The way we view our membership is ambitious people. We want to create amazing journalism for people who want to get ahead, for ambitious women, for ambitious men. So that was my little epiphany. It's like, yeah, I'm ambitious. And and I'm okay with that.
I know we're going to have lots of questions. We're going to borrow a few minutes from the next panel and pay it back. But I'm going to lead off, and if you have a question, raise your hand, and the mic will come to you. Bringing this back to how important equality and diversity are in terms of making us smarter at news organizations. But there's a lot of resources in this program, right? How is this? How's this going to work how can this be workable for all, or are you just lucky that you work for this organization?
So I don't know how you defined a lot of resources. I have because I don't sleep and take vacation as a result of working on this program, and this is just one of a myriad of different programs that we work on. We have a team of 3 people that are full-time, that work on this experience and other top talent experiences. And then we have a bunch of interns that have come in and said, I just want to contribute, let me know how. So it's really interesting, and actually even parts of the organization beyond just the HR department that just want to be involved. So part of what we're trying to inculcate is stretch assignments and get people as involved as possible.
But also this idea of executive sponsorship, it's free. Like, get someone who's senior in your company and someone who's not, and formalize something within an HR department where it's like 2 hours a month, right? Anybody can do that.
Well, I want to come back to that.
We are a large company. We've got a lot of different components. I mean, some people view Dow Jones as almost like a data company. We're the Journal. We're Dow Jones Media Group. We have a lot of different parts. So I definitely hear you what you're saying, but I do think, like, in my kind of limited way, I go back to London and I try and like just tell everybody what we're doing.
Totally.
And we're thinking about other programs and follow-up programs. Just before we go to Q&A, I'm mindful of throwing the floor to Becky. If we could get Becky a mic on the floor there, who is our Deputy Global Economics Editor based in Washington, because I think it'd be great to talk a little bit about the retention and loyalty power of Ignite.
Absolutely. Well, and first I have to say, we mentioned previously the WhatsApp group. They've been talking this whole time as I've been sharing images with them, and one of them, Sharon, piped in to say, where there is one of us, there is all of us. Aww. So that's the kind of group that's been cultivated here, very much everyone pulling for the individual missions, and having a shared mission has been really powerful. So when I consider what my options are for investing in my career, here I am with a company that I now know intimately, where I now have a deep connections across the business and internationally. That's a major incentive when I'm considering where I want to invest myself.
Yeah, totally.
And being in a room with 25 women where we develop a sense of shared mission and where we're all in positions to act on that on our own, in support of one another and together, that's an incredibly potent thing.
I would say too, I had recently a male colleague, quite senior on the business side, said, can we meet next week? And I said, well, I'm out. And he said, oh, so-and-so's out and so-and-so's out. Is this the Ignite program? And I said, yeah. And he said, I've never wanted to be a woman so much in my life.
Okay, top that. Questions? Any questions from the field here? Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Alexa Kors. I'm actually an intern in the Journal's Washington Bureau for the summer.
Hi. Welcome.
And I wanted to ask if you all have a piece of advice that you'd wish you'd known earlier in your career, and that was more about long-term planning for your career.
Oh, what a great question. I mean, stick with Becky, 1. 2, but 2, just quickly, I think it's a little bit what I said earlier, is that I think people are a lot more willing to let you in than you realize. And I was so intimidated when I was younger to just like knock on an office or send an email. Don't be. Senior leadership wants to talk to you just as much, probably more than you want to talk to them.
I think it came out on the first day of our Ignite launch, or that week when we were having this kind of bonding session. That's critical. Find people with which you can bond, but so the network is very important. But it's also be an advocate for yourself. It's not who you know, it's who knows you. So think, how can I actually advocate? Don't presume everyone is reading your amazing stories. Like, if you think I want to be a staffer at this organization, then you should try and make those connections. Becky tells me you're amazing anyway. But the network is critical. That doesn't really get to your question. Maybe we could have been better at that earlier in our careers. But it's certainly a lesson from Ignite. Is there anything you would have done differently?
So many things. Some of my favorite things that have changed me, one is someone once told me to take the CEO perspective. So when you're looking at your work environment, go beyond your turf or what you do, and imagine you're the CEO, and how would you behave, and what would you do in that scenario? And it's been a really useful framework for me to sort of break down barriers and to think about what's the best thing for the organization and for everybody. So pretend you're the CEO once in a while in that DC bureau. And
I just have one thing to share. So I do a lot of executive coaching across the company, and I do coaching for our interns in the summer. One of the things that I truly believe, like if I were to look at, and we were actually asked this through the Ignite program, what would our 80-year-old self tell us today? And I believe, number 1, our self-limiting beliefs get in the way too much.
Yes.
Number 2, I believe that if you create an intersection between what you get excited about and what you excel in, you've found your sweet spot. And be unapologetic about pursuing it.
Yeah, and just like don't believe that nothing is going to change. I mean, I think there's across many of our companies, I imagine I hear that all the time. People say, oh, there's no point in going to that meeting because, you know, nothing's going to change. And there's no point in engaging in that because, you know what, I don't really have the time and I'm just doing my job and I'm just trying to, like, you know, keep my head down. And so what I've been telling people, like, all the time is, like, get involved, raise your hand, like, be engaged, go read the CEO letters, like, read those emails about internal communication stuff, think, and then, you know, you get people in a room and suddenly it's quiet for the first minute or so,
right.
and you get the conversation going. Change can really happen out of that, and I think it's a critical thing for us as Igniters, that we're not some, like, diversity program off on a tangent, right. Ticking a box. The thing we participated in last week was looking at a real challenge for our company, which is how do we grow our membership, our subscription model, in an age when advertising is no longer the backbone of our business. That is a critical challenge that our company is wrestling with. We made some recommendations. You know, we're going to see where they go, but they're going to go somewhere. They're not going to just be put in the bin and think, oh God, we did it. That's great. We can tick the box.
I think we can sum all of that up by saying, be ambitious.
Yeah.
My last question is, we all sort of got heated up when we were reminded harshly last fall by some really powerful reporting about the pervasive nature of sexual misconduct and harassment in our workplaces. And how does this, do you think, make a safer, more respectful workplace? How does this go back there and solve some of those problems, the Ignite program?
Respectful. I mean, I think respect is at the heart of this entire process, and trying to think how we can be, you know, inclusive. And that involves conversations not just with women, just with men. But
I think it's also about the network, right? Because you have the network, the lateral network, you have the network above you, the newsroom. I think that by sort of bringing people closer together in that way, like a shared sense of values and aligning values, is really helpful towards
And we
that
know
goal.
that women's leadership is a key to this whole equation, and that's presumably where it all starts.
But being safe is also things like, can I, you know, I'm thinking about having a family. Is my boss going to be okay with that? And I think sometimes, you know, some managers are just a little bit more flexible than others. So, like, what I certainly try and do is try and think you can have those conversations. You should be able to have that conversation with whatever manager. We need to be an organization that is diverse across many of these spectrums. It's not just gender. Gender is just the beginning.
Right. And to borrow a phrase from Jill Geisler, you know, we know that righteous men need to be good allies in this fight, right? And so
some of them are we need he for she is something we've been talking about.
Yeah.
And, like, we also need to, I hate to say it, but, like, some men feel a bit threatened by this. And, you know, we need to help bring them along because it's not an us and them thing.
Is there any other questions out there? Go ahead.
Hi, Rachel Smolkin. I'm with CNN. First of all, congratulations. This sounds incredibly exciting, what you've accomplished. It's just fabulous. My question kind of picks up on that discussion about men, and I'm curious what you said when you were starting out. Like, I'm a senior woman leader here already. Why do I need training? Why don't the guys next to me need training?
Yeah.
What is the answer to that question?
Well, I think the answer is what I was just saying. We need to try and find a way of sort of bringing, like, I think the worst thing is if it's viewed just as something for women. I think we have to try and force change, and I think that was the kind of genesis of Ignite. And when Meredith spoke about our CEO, Will Lewis, he just announced these things. He didn't, like, spend months discussing it with people, because when you do that, sometimes you kind of go around in circles and you end up down a rabbit hole. So you have to force it, and then there are some follow-up programs that you are working on that are not going to be just for women.
So we're going to be launching a program in a couple of months called Accelerate, and it will be gender agnostic, but it's really about diversity of thought. I mean, that's the wider conversation. So if we can offer programs that really focus on diversity of thought, I think that will inculcate the culture that we want. Right now, Ignite is it. So we have a lot of, when are you creating a top talent, you know, white male program? Dow Jones. And so, you know, as I had mentioned before, the invitation to do more is voracious.
Last question.
Hi, Alicia Shepard. One of the reasons that women don't get ahead is because they take time out to have children, and then the workplace isn't always welcoming, and obviously everyone in this room who has kids knows that. So how did Ignite deal with that?
Really funny that you mentioned.
It was one of the issues that came up last week, actually, during our Innovation Week. And, you know, there are certain things I think that we're doing as a company that you want to talk
I mean,
about.
it was actually interesting. Last week, we had one woman in the program bring both of her daughters.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
And she stayed in a hotel. She went out to eat at the CEO's. I mean, she just looked at me and she said, "Listen, I need to take a break right now because I need to be with my children." And she looked at me and she said, "This is the company we should be working for." And so I'm starting to activate some of this. And everybody, you guys, I mean, I don't think there was even a question in your mind in terms of how we want to be. I think a lot of policies across HR are being re-examined.
Yeah.
Compassionate care is being rolled out.
Exactly.
Paternal leave.
What does compassionate care mean?
So you would be granted, and it hasn't launched yet, it will be launching in September, you would be granted, I think, 4 to 6 weeks for taking care of somebody in need, a dependent in need, and it doesn't have to be in succession. So the role that we play is really being reevaluated, where we work, how we work, really opening up a more flexible, transparent way of working. And this, I think, has been a signal towards some of the different things that we really need to think about as an organization.
I know we're out of time, but very quickly, I do want to say I got promoted each time I went on maternity leave. Once in the job in the US, and the second was the move to Paris. So things do happen, and you shouldn't view it as something that's going to break your career. But going back to your question about things I wish I'd known differently, I've also come across a lot of women in our organization who think, I'm not really going to go for that job because I think I'm going to have a kid or maybe going to have a second baby, and I'm not sure how it's going to go. I always tell them, just go for it. Go for the job. And because sometimes, you know, for whatever reason, things don't work out or they take longer. But, you know, I've always found working parents are incredibly amazing multitaskers. And, you know, I don't think it should ever be something that should hold you back.
Yeah, it's also, it's a company culture and a work environment where you're not penalized for it. And I think that's incredibly important. I've brought my daughter in when there's a lack of school and a lack of daycare, and I have meetings, and it's not a daycare, but she's able to figure it out, and she sits there, and
you're the leader.
Get through the day, right?
So
and I'm
see
the
that.
boss, right? And so people know that that's a thing that we can do here. We can work flexibly, we can work remotely, we can figure it out if we're honest and open and transparent about it.
As long as we get the job done.
But that's a given.
That's a given.
Why wouldn't we?
Yeah.
You know, why wouldn't we get the job done?
Thank you, Ignite. This is a remarkable program. We wish you huge success.
Thank you very much.
We want to come back in a year and hear more about.
We were saying we'd love to partner up with the Parashift project.
We will. We shall.
Maybe we need to get some of that training.
Yeah, I think that'd be great.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks for having us. Thanks, you guys.
I'm Jerry Holmes, Managing Editor of Enterprise at NPR. First of all, I wanted to thank Kathy and Jan for inviting us to this event today. We're honored to be here, and also a shout out to Jill, who has been instrumental and a great guide through some very difficult times we've had at NPR. So thank you, Jill. We wanted to just kind of sketch out our idea and the project that we've been embarked on now for about 8 months. It goes back to last November. It's a project that's ongoing. We are hoping to be training in September on this project and then formally launch it in the fall. And it's been a long haul. It's been very rewarding for all of us. We have an incredible group. My colleagues here and 2 others have come together. 3 from the newsroom and 3 others outside the newsroom. And talking about walls, as we were talking about before, that was our first hurdle, was hurdle or wall that we needed to scale. I had never had conversations with some of my colleagues before, frankly, and am somewhat embarrassed about it now, but we have come together with this idea. And it was an idea that was born in a moment of crisis. It was born in a very, very difficult moment at NPR when our colleagues had been so directly affected by events that we're very sad about. And the idea was a simple idea. The idea was to create a peer group of volunteers at the network, at the grassroots level, to engage in conversation, to begin conversations, to initiate conversations, and to create an avenue to surface a lot of the issues and a lot of the problems that existed. So that was the very, very simple idea that we wanted to start. The first thing that we needed to do was to recognize that we had a serious problem at NPR about trust. There was clearly, out of our crisis, there was a lot of mistrust. People didn't know where to go. We had a somewhat broken system to go up through human resources and up into the legal division, and we thought, well, let's figure out a way to help that process along. We need to develop a partnership here, and with autonomy, but in partnership with the company, to get people comfortable enough to surface the conversations that they're already having. That was the critical thing. These conversations were happening already. So we wanted to find a group of trusted colleagues that these people could come to. We brought this idea to senior leadership and had some very candid and good conversations about getting this off the ground. It had never been done at NPR before, and we wanted to push forward on it and really retain the grassroots aspect to it. The leadership recognized that, the need for that, and they trusted us to go forward and bring the program together. We wanted to go across the news and the rest of NPR to really bring people together, to cross those cultural divisions that clearly exist, because this problem that we were confronting exists throughout the building, and we needed to recognize that it wasn't just the newsroom. That was the entire, all of NPR. And so we got together with HR and legal, and we kind of laid out our plans and our thoughts, and we began our conversations because, as I said, we wanted to build this as a partnership. This had, to our knowledge, this had never really been attempted before around the country. It had never been kind of struggling with this kind of a situation. And so some of the research and some of the models that we wanted weren't really out there. So there was a lot that we had to dig into, and my colleagues are going to fill you out a little bit more on that. And finally, we wanted to just make sure that we were absolutely solid on the goal we were trying to establish here. And that was to set up a safe space, to initiate conversations, to create a core of peers who can help with those conversations and then be shepherds along the way, so that those conversations can continue, so that there's follow-up in a rebuilding HR and legal department, so that we see it all the way to the end, so that there are answers for everyone, and surfacing a lot of these issues and making sure that these get out into the proper channels. So that's my overview, and I'm going to pass off to my colleague Hugo.
My name is Hugo Rojo, and I'm a member of NPR's Marketing, Branding, and Communications team. I just celebrated my 3 years this July, and I started as an intern there in summer 2014, and it's been a great experience just overall at the company, and now, as Jerry said, kind of bridging that gap and working with folks from other parts of the organization. And the piece of the puzzle that I wanted to talk about today was really something that our Dow Jones colleagues talked about thinking about this as both a challenge and an opportunity to offer a new resource to everyone in the organization. You know, I think some of the issues that kind of kicked a lot of this off, you know, maybe were housed in the newsroom, and we've learned that this is an opportunity to help reshape the culture throughout the entire organization. And so this is a volunteer supported effort, and in recruiting these volunteers, there was a true and honest and very intentional effort to recruit folks from every corner of the organization. And so we had a lot of response from the newsroom, and my fellow business side colleagues and I actually had to do some work in sniffing out potential volunteers on the business side. And I think at the end of the day, we came up with, how many volunteers did we land on?
Well, about 10% of the company stepped forward in the end.
Came up. Exactly, and so we whittled that down to make sure that every department in the organization, every shift, thinking about identity. You know, folks that maybe have been with us for a handful of years, folks that have spent their entire careers with NPR, folks in different offices around the United States, in New York and in California, in different shifts, because we want to make sure that this resource is available to most folks at most times. And so we were very intentional about sitting down and looking at who have we worked with, who has shown previous leadership skills, who do we think has the potential to grow into this role as well. I'm the newest manager on the team, and so I was pretty vocal about the need for up-and-coming folks to join our volunteer group and really kind of help mold that part of the management and leadership training that goes into having these difficult conversations. And a bit that my other colleagues will talk about is really an education about all of the avenues that people have to escalate, elevate, and just get help with whatever issue they're having. And so I think it was an education for me, specifically as a new manager in the organization, and how can we bring that education to the rest of the volunteers? I think something that we've made sure to underscore with our colleagues in HR and legal is that we're not here to replace them. We're not here to replace HR or legal or the complaint process. We're here to guide people to the tools and to the avenues that they need. And so, yeah, I think that's what I wanted to touch on.
Sounds good. Hi, I'm Sharon Thomas. I am the Senior Director of News Operations and Budget. So I work in the news division. I've been at NPR in September, it'll be 19 years. I started when I was 5. And so, as we've been talking about, I'm going to just tell you a little bit about how we came to realize that we would need some training, because as Jerry pointed out, this effort to have a peer-led group to support other peers through these types of issues just really, as he said, hasn't been done at NPR, and as we found, really hadn't been done at a lot of organizations that we could find. So we knew we would need help. And what we started off in probably, I think, November, thinking, this will happen in about a month. We'll have this thing singing by January for sure. It has taken much longer, but it's been a very thoughtful process for us. So that was the key thing, that this was really important. We wanted to launch it correctly. There were a lot of interest from our leaders in the company, working with HR and legal, as we've said. We just wanted to strike the right balance, and also the staff, to have them feel like, yes, this is an autonomous group that we're trying to put together, but we want to work with our HR and legal. It's not, as Hugo said, we're not trying to subvert the process. So just to walk you through a little bit. So besides our timeline that got stretched a little bit, what we were looking for was any entity that had maybe worked with the media organization or had some background in working in higher education, working with a nonprofit, or had done any sort of peer-to-peer work is sort of what we were seeking out. We found either people in one camp or another, not any one group that sort of had all of these things. We found a lot of organizations that did work in this area of harassment, where it really was on domestic violence, or there were a lot of law firms that dealt with lawsuits and litigation, but not really, again, in the areas where we wanted to know, can you help peers, people who don't really work in these areas, help guide their colleagues through reporting and feeling comfortable. So we got some different groups from different areas. We whittled that down to a couple of groups, at least 3, I think ultimately, maybe it ended up being 4, that we worked through and interviewed, if you will. And we're still, this is an ongoing process, but we've just recently gotten to the place where we've identified who we'd like to work with and move forward with in terms of a training. And then what we've said about doing through this process is outlining what we want to train this group of volunteers to do. So there are a lot of different areas that we're looking at. Obviously, these will be people taking in information that can sometimes be quite emotional. So we want the volunteers to have self-care. So that's a component of the training. We obviously want them to be trained on the policies of the company as well as just the law on harassment in general. We will be looking to train them in just coaching and listening, and also going over our company-wide harassment training. Everyone has been required to take that. So and one other thing, when we started on this process, we knew we sort of had to draft up what we call a job description for the volunteers, just so they would know the parameters of what we're looking for them to do. So that's an aspect of the training as well. And what we came up with, sketched out, is basically going to be a day-long endeavor with people, as Hugo said, from across the company. So coming into the headquarters here in DC, and we will spend the time in probably 2 days. We have about 45 individuals that will be trained, and eventually, I think we will make the names available. Obviously, that's core to the process, but we haven't up to this point. So once we get ready to launch, all the volunteers will be known. We'll have a way for identifying those people so people know how to find them, no matter what shift or what part of the company you come from. So that was our basic process of getting to a training. So I hand off to my colleague.
Mary Fran Tyler from NPR, and I am Senior Director of Strategy, where my focus is really working on technology strategy and ensuring that all of our stations across the company, as well as those of the public radio satellite system, are enabled to receive content. I've been at NPR about 10 years, so I'm on the business side of a media company at this point. But for about 20 years before that, I worked for a local newspaper in Massachusetts, the Worcester Telegram and Gazette. I worked for Thomson Newspapers as its Washington correspondent before going to Gannett and working at USA Today. Worked as reporter, editor, graphics editor, and then was one of the founders of usatoday.com. So I've had a foot in both the news side and the business side and technology side, which has been very helpful in coming to work with this virtual team of colleagues, because one of the things that we really did need to think about was, are we thinking about everyone in this company who could be affected by this? So one of the key things that we really delved into is the role of HR and legal. And we really wanted to make sure that we did not see ourselves as being the representatives of HR or legal. This was a grassroots organization, but at the same time, we want to make sure that we are acknowledging and living up to the law as well as all the corporate policies. Very critical in working through a peer network. We had a lot of very robust conversations among ourselves, but a lot of our conversations involve meetings with representatives from HR and legal, and they have been invaluable in helping guide and steer us, and I think have really helped the success of keeping us moving forward. But for example, one of the issues that we have argued, been very passionate about is what's the level of reporting? Is it, since we have a mix of volunteers who are both managers and non-managers, managers are under for short, the must report, whereas non-managers don't necessarily need to report certain issues. We decided that it would be better for everyone to need to report. But we really see ourselves as communicators. We want to make sure that people understand that we are just one of the avenues that the company has. There are a variety of ways that people can report what may be going on. It could be through a HR business partner assigned to their department or division. They could go directly to HR. They could go to legal directly as well. They could go to their manager, their manager's manager, or any other manager in the building. But in addition, we have an anonymous phone line that people can call into, and we also have a 24/7 online software program that can be used for
reporting anonymously as well. So that's also part of the goal that we have in working to make sure that this network is a success.
So first of all, thank you for coming. It takes some courage to talk about a work in progress when you haven't figured out every detail and it's a sensitive area. So thank you for telling us about it, because this is important for us to all build off of. While you're gathering your questions in the audience, I want to ask, I didn't understand, when will it launch? Is there a launch date for this?
Not an exact date.
Okay.
We're looking, but the fall. It's coming up. Yep, very soon.
In the fall, okay. And go ahead, we got some questions out here. I don't want to miss anything. What, were there any, there had to have been challenges internally, right? Because we're talking about 3 of the most difficult situations of perceived threats to HR, to leadership, even unions. I'm not sure if that was an aspect of this. Can you talk a little bit about how you negotiated those challenges? Or was there just magical buy-in?
No, there was not magical buy-in. We even had some of the norming, storming, forming among our group, because half of us were from the newsroom and half of us weren't. So we needed to agree to disagree. We had a lot of learning about each other, which we heard from our Wall Street Journal colleagues too. I think that's true in every media organization I've ever worked in. That's been part of the issue. I will say one of the really fun things to come out of this has been that I now have a group of colleagues that I know have my back, and I have their back, and it's been really very rewarding. I will also say that as we brought the volunteers together, we directly went to the 2 unions that we have and asked them to make sure that they had participation in the volunteer group. So we really tried to put on the hats of all of our different colleagues around the building and say, who else needs to be here? Who do we need to hear from? Who haven't we heard from?
And what are you going to do with what you find out? Besides the mandatory reporting that has to go on if there's an issue, how are you going to take this sort of cultural check that you're doing, which is really important, and use it to better the organization?
So we'll continue to meet once the group is up and running and volunteers are out there. We will continue to meet once a month and continue in conversations with them so that we can, at the very least, surface in very general ways without specific names, situations that are happening, and what we can do with that information. And we'll bring the entire group together occasionally as well, so that issues along the way can be surfaced. They can come to us any other time that they need to, but there will be regular meetings, and then we will be regularly meeting with HR and legal as well to share whatever we can.
Obviously. Go ahead.
How did you choose the 45? The Igniters had to apply, which I think is a great way for people to step up, but it sounds like you tapped on the shoulders, and once you have these 45, having worked at NPR, I can imagine you're going to have some pushback on the 45.
So there was some tapping, but I would say by and large it was mostly a volunteer. We put out several emails and several calls explaining about what we were doing and asking people to step forward, and they did. They came to us. After that,
had to choose.
So we still have to choose by essentially vetting the individuals with their managers, which we did. And so that's how we ended up with the group.
I think it's also important to look at, let's say, Department A had 10 volunteers, and we didn't have anyone from Department B. There was an obvious decision to say, we don't need 10 folks from Department A, but if Department A is exponentially larger, maybe it's good to have a proportional representation of that. But I think the tapping really came from, you know what, we don't have anybody from this part of the organization. Right. Let's ask some managers, let's ask for feedback on who should we be elevating, who should we be talking with, so that we can make sure that there's representative volunteers from the entire organization. I think that's really where I misspoke earlier. It's the tapping came from, you know what, we really need to represent this area of the organization. Let's see if we can find somebody there.
I was just going to add, I mean, it was really to make sure that we had a broad range of representatives from across the company. And so like Hugo had laid out in terms of location, in terms of, manager, non-manager, union, non-union, shifts, all of those sort of things, and backgrounds and everything. So, and then like he said, if there was that we had, so many in this area, then we would make some, decisions about that. But we really didn't have to, I don't think cut that many people.
No,
or,
And we're also talking about using those that couldn't be in the first wave as reserves, because we see this as an ongoing process. This is not something that's a 6-month gig. We've asked people for a commitment of a minimum of a year to be, and we will be making sure that everyone across the company knows who these folks are.
Did you think about race, sexual orientation,
Yes.
all that?
Oh, yeah.
Everything.
Yeah,
Yep,
everything.
absolutely.
So you did kind of an audit of your volunteers to make sure you had the right balance. Alyssa?
Are you going to open this up to freelancers, and if so, how are you going to let them know that it's available to them?
We, to be honest, we have not kind of crossed that bridge yet. We haven't figured that part out, but we wanted to get the company's first wave out, and then we'll see how that goes. And obviously, we're gonna want to address that at some point.
Yeah, we can't underscore enough that we're in process. And also, there was no blueprint for this. So everything despite all the research that we did and talking to everyone from professors to looking at law cases, it was really challenging for us to figure out even how to start to establish something like this.
And I think it's we just had this conversation this week about the scope of the issues that we want to make sure are being reported. And so NPR being such a complex organization, we want to cater and make sure we're servicing folks in their professional capacity as NPR employees. And so that may mean folks from our development division interact with donors all the time. What if there's an incident there? We have member stations, hundreds of member stations around the country. What if something happens while somebody's there at visiting a member station? And so I think it may be a natural progression for us to think about as a freelancer, you are working for us at that point in time. What do we do if something happens to you while you are working with us? And so I think it's a very valid question, and we can, we'll certainly be thinking about it.
Just as a point of reference, I know that after the incidents at National Geographic, they actually included in their contracts their grievance process for freelancers. So that might be an idea.
Thank you for that.
Sounds really interesting, commendable what you're doing. So I just wanted to ask about, as you're getting this off the ground or pulling all the various parts together, what is the current situation, say if something happens, or some even like a non-extreme case of harassment? They're all extreme to their own degree, but I think you describe it here just like workplace behavior.
Yeah.
So there are the normal channels or avenues that are available now. Managers of managers, any manager in the building, the legal department, human resources, et cetera. And to be honest, there are also a lot of informal conversations continuing to happen. So that's kind of bubbling there, and that's essentially the form we're taking anyways. We'll just get formalized with training.
Jill?
I want to embarrass you a little bit and acknowledge that I do work with your organization. Trust is such an important thing. I think that your response was actually to the idea, not that there was rampant harassment going on, but that there was a huge breach of trust, and people felt they didn't know whom they could trust. I know from having done a lot of work with you that the people who started this endeavor were people who already had reputations for being trusted. People were coming to you already for advice. You were the whisper network in some ways, but it was, I'm going to whisper to you, could you give me advice? How do you look at trust as something that you are going to create, maintain, and nurture both in your work and in the organization?
So I think that first of all, the fact that the company was able to support us in doing and launching this is one of the building blocks of trust. I think as we've tried to demonstrate to our other colleagues our trust for each other And then we have had meetings with the volunteers to date to keep them apprised of where we are in process. And we consider that we have 45 or 70 additional prophets that are out there who are also trying to build these building blocks of trust. And then each of us, as we are showing up for work every day, are trying to be, you know, a trustful colleague. We're trying to reach out, we're trying to listen, we're trying to, you know, walk by the coffee pot and have a cup of coffee with someone. I think that's really critical. And again, as our journal colleagues have talked about, you know, leaning over the cubicle. And instead of sending that email, walking to talk to someone. I think that those small pieces are so critical to building trust, but also improving communications. We do a fabulous job of communications externally, and we just sometimes forget about how we can build that communication internally.
And a really important issue we've all been grappling with, which is that rebuilding idea. And there is such a gulf between any company in particular right now, between the upper levels of any company and the grassroots and the newsroom floor or wherever. And so by creating this opportunity for people to engage in conversations, that's where the trust begins. And by having managers and non-managers involved, that becomes the model for having trust be rebuilt at that level, which is critical right now, where there is kind of not a lot, frankly, going on. So
I think what the most extraordinary thing I've learned from this and from the Ignite team is how much you care. You have big day jobs, all of you. The news cycle is pretty ravenous.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Right. Okay. And say again. Yeah, but besides your regular work, which is intense, you're willing to take the time to put this together, and that's extraordinary, and that's what it's going to take, I think, for all of us to make these changes that we want to see. Thank you very much, NPR.
Thank you.
And now we're going to ask Tracy Schweikert from Politico to put the capstone on the program here. Well, first of all, she's a rock star HR director at VP at Politico, and she's on our Project Shift Advisory Board, Power Shift, got too many projects going. And she once talked about the concept of intentional onboarding to me. And this is, you've got, I mean, Politico, back in the day, had a different kind of culture, let's just be honest, and it's changed a lot, and I'm sure a lot of credit is to you and your strategic thinking about it. So you're going to talk to us today, and if you want to take the podium or stay here, whatever you want to do.
I'll sit up here so I'm not blocking my PowerPoint.
So I give you Tracy Schweikert.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to all of you. Thank you to our peers at Dow Jones and NPR. A lot of great information that we're certainly going to take back to Politico and build on the things that we're doing. What I wanted to talk to all of you about is the work that we are doing in terms of bringing new people into the organization. At Politico, we are doing quite a bit of hiring, which is exciting. I think media in general has the opportunity to bring in a lot of great talent. And I think before a year ago, we did an okay job of that. And what we really want to do is make sure that from the very moment that we say, congratulations, welcome to Politico, that we are doing everything we can to create an intentional culture of inclusion. I want to be really honest with you. We don't get it absolutely right every single day. But what we want to make sure of is that we have plenty of steps along the way, that we are thinking about it, and that we are engaging not only the HR team, but our managers and everybody throughout the organization. As I get started, I'm going to embarrass them just a little. Over here to the side, I have Kat McKibben and Juliet Medina. Kat and Juliet support our newsroom, and most of the work that I'm talking about today are work that they actually do on a regular basis. And so I could not be talking to you about the successes we have without acknowledging the people that are actually making it happen. So thanks to both of you. So interestingly enough, I want to talk to you about the fact that a culture of inclusion is a team sport. And talk to you a little bit about fundamentals, about bringing everybody together, and how do we continue to flex those muscles. So let's start by talking about the fundamentals. And for the fundamentals, I'm going to go way back to before we even talk about a new position or a new individual. Let's look at our company's policies and our written communications, because that's really the first conversation we have with a new employee. And I think a lot of organizations forget that that is where we need to go. And so let me see if I can get the clicker to work the right way. There we go, hooray. So first and foremost, what do our policies look like? Are they written in legalese? When I came to Politico, I inherited an employee handbook that to this day makes us shudder because it was written by lawyers, and I have many lawyers that I love dearly in my life. But they are not the folks to really talk about the culture of an organization, right? And so we saw that a lot of our policies said, as applicable by law, or in accordance to the law. And the fact of the matter is, we don't want to create a culture based on what the law tells us to do. I think that's a little bit of where we got to where we were, right? The law tells us to do this, and we were absolutely doing that bare minimum, but we want to be here. We want the culture that every employee deserves, and it starts by going back to those policies. The other thing that we looked at was our benefits. And in both cases, making sure that what we are saying as part of that first conversation with employees really matters. In terms of benefits, as we were looking at both our policies for leaves of absence and then the benefits that were associated with that, we had a parental leave policy, and actually back then it was probably a maternity leave policy, that referenced primary caregiver and secondary caregiver. What does that even mean? I think that was somebody's attempt to open up parental leave past mothers, and so somebody was like, all right, well, let's do primary and secondary caregiver. I think it was actually Kat who said, I'm not going to ask somebody if they're a primary or secondary caregiver. Do I have to do that? And the answer is no, we don't have to do that. We want to support all the parents of Politico. And so we're going to write our parental leave policy for anybody who walks in the door the minute they walk in the door. We're not going to make you wait for a year, because are you more deserving of parental benefits a year after you've been with us? No, you're deserving of it day one. So how do we take those policies and those benefits and write them in a way that makes sure that our employees feel supported and engaged? The other thing that we looked at is, are our benefits really written for a traditional family? Are they created for a construct of life outside of work that maybe is a little limiting right now? And again, one of the reasons why we went to parental leave. We're also looking at right now, are there additional benefits that we should be looking at that would be more inclusive to a non-traditional family? And so that's something that we're spending a lot of time on. I get a joke about this, but we've talked about it a lot at Politico. Pet insurance, paternity leave, all those types of benefits for millennials are the largest group of pet owners in the country today, and Politico employs a lot of millennials, and so we need to talk about that as a benefit. I'm going to date myself for a second here. When I first got into the workforce, not all organizations offered dental insurance. Most of you probably do not remember a time where organizations didn't offer dental insurance, but it used to be an optional benefit. No longer an optional benefit. No organization would ever say, we're not going to do that. We need to do that same thing with these other types of benefits that embrace all different types of lifestyles. And so again, if you're thinking about onboarding, you've got to go all the way back to those fundamentals, because if we don't have those in place, then we're not really being inclusive once we say, welcome to Politico or welcome to whatever organization you're part of. The last thing that we did, and this is something we did fairly recently, was we created Politico values. And we did that by working with employees across the organization. And we said, listen, rather than a group of executives saying this is what we stand for, we'd like you all to tell us, why do you come to Politico? Why do you come to work every day? Why is this something that you're proud of? And what it's been able to do is help us create a common language where we can talk about success. And so once somebody comes in the door, we talk to them about those values, and we'll tell you a little bit about that in a minute. And we've got this common language, and it's something that hopefully gets everybody engaged and inclusive in the same way. So those were the fundamentals. So we put those in place. Then we can get excited about welcome to Politico. And so we've got an amazing talent acquisition team that is finding us some great talent. The offer goes out, and you can read too many blog posts out in the world about how people get disengaged before they even start. And so we are trying to work on that. We've used technology to help us. We've got an onboarding portal that we send out to new hires, and as part of that onboarding portal, we are sending them our employee handbook that is now written like a real person. We're sending them our benefits so that they can see the things that are important to us. We're talking to them about our values. At Politico, we have a Pulitzer Prize-winning cartoonist, Matt Worker, who's actually drawn his version of a Politico map. And so we send that to folks so that they can start to get to understand our culture. In addition, we encourage our managers and their teams to use social media to reach out to those new hires, right? Because nobody is more excited about a job than somebody who has just accepted a job, right? So how do we continue with that momentum, and how do we start to get teams involved? So really using social media to help us with that. We've got day one orientation. We happen to do orientation on Tuesdays. The reason that we've continued to do it on Tuesdays is, if many of you were like me, we work our last job up until that Friday. And so by doing Tuesday, everybody has guaranteed a day to themselves before they start a new opportunity. That was not something that I put in place. It was here before me, but it's something that we think continues to be important. We do a day one orientation. We get everybody together. And in that day one, we are talking about our values. We also make sure that we talk about how can you get included, because I think the other thing that happens at organizations is those of us who have been there a while know that Juliet runs Politico Gives, and this person over here does Politico Runs, but what about that new person coming in? And if we want to be inclusive, we need to make sure that every employee walking in the door knows about all of these amazing programs and can be part of them. So we actually have a slide in orientation that says, how can you get involved? And we're constantly trying to encourage them to do that. Week one, we do a handful of things. We do employ online training for workplace inclusion and preventing harassment. I'll tell you how we're going to supplement that a little further as part of the onboarding process. But we do want to do that to make sure everybody has a good base level. We've got a great tool that is very interactive. What I love about it is if you click over to another screen, it stops. So we can't get through that thing where people just used to let it run in the background anymore. So we've got that, but we're supplementing that with additional conversations, and I'll talk to you a little bit about that. Our amazing business partners make sure that they reach out to every single new hire. And there are times that we have 7, 8, and 9 new hires in a given week, and those folks get an individual conversation. And as part of that conversation, someone like Juliet or Kat or the rest of our team is saying, hey, here's who I am. Let me tell you about what we expect in terms of culture across all of Politico. I'm a resource to you. If you're ever in a situation where you don't know what to do or you don't know who to ask, I'm that person that you can come to. Really making that personal connection so that they know, so that no one can say at Politico, where's HR? Because everybody knows exactly where we are. But really making that personal connection. I'm excited for you in this role. Here are some things that I know. Let me tell you some things that you might not know about the organization. In the newsroom, they also do something called the Welcome Wagon, and again, that predated us, but Juliet does a lot of work right now to keep it going. And we match up a volunteer in the newsroom to be that experienced guide for that newbie. And we have heard time and time again how helpful that is. We just recently started doing a diversity and inclusion session, and one of the employees said that that was the best part. She was new, she was a person of color, she was in an entry-level position, and just knowing that she had that person that wasn't her manager really helped her learn the way around the newsroom, who does what, and she could go and ask that person that stupid question that maybe she wouldn't have asked someone else. So the Welcome Wagon is something that we really do a lot with. We entice the Welcome Wagon with food, because food is always a great way to do that. We get bagels sometimes. When we have a new group of employees start, we'll do cookies at the newsroom table. Everybody come and meet the interns. So we're really trying to make sure that we're making connections everywhere we can. Monthly, we get everybody who has started in that given month, and it's getting a little harder to do it in some of our conference rooms because we've got such great groups of employees. We do a new hire lunch. Anybody in the organization, newsroom, business side, shared services, we get them all together. And there are usually a couple members of the HR team that are there. And we ask them how it's going. What went well? What things do you wish you would have known about the hiring process? What part of onboarding up until this point has been helpful to you? We do a couple of other crazy questions. What's your favorite place to go to lunch? What was the secret that you found out about Politico that nobody told you? The one that I always tell people is we've actually got trash cans in the drawers, and usually there's one person in the new hires that's like, oh, I was wondering why none of our rooms had trash cans in it. So, but it's a nice way to get a group of people together from all over the organization, and then we encourage them to continue to use each other as they go forward. What's nice about this is this has gotten some really good positive feedback. We often have, if we have a large class from the newsroom, our newsroom leaders often want to sit in, or they're asking us, how did it go? What kind of feedback did you get? So we're getting a lot of traction with this simple, again, buying people lunch, nothing too expensive, nothing too crazy. You just need time and a little bit of money for pizza or district taco. And then quarterly, we do a handful of other things. We do an online survey 90 days out. So once you've been here 90 days, we send you a survey. We're asking you a handful of questions. What's really nice about that is we use those same sets of questions throughout your entire life cycle with Politico. New hire questions, annual engagement survey, exit survey. So we can track and see, okay, was it really just a honeymoon period, or how were we able to see that carry all the way through? So it's good data for us. It's still new, so we don't have a lot of history, but it's a nice way to get some feedback. We also, as I mentioned before, we do the online training, but we follow that up with a quarterly conversation. Right now, we break out our intern cohort separately. We do the conversation specifically with the interns, and then we do all the other new hires. And what we do is we talk about what is workplace inclusion, what is harassment, what is discrimination, what does that look like? The very legal definitions, what are our policies, where do you find our policies? And we spend our time, what do we expect of employees? And then we share what we expect of our managers as well. I want everybody to know what we expect across all of Politico when it comes to those very important topics so that we can hold each other accountable. And that's been a great discussion. Juliet's been leading the conversation with the newsroom interns, and she's always just so impressed with the questions that they come back with. They usually come back with the best questions. Sometimes with a group of new employees, we have to kind of pull the conversations out of them. But it's really a great way to say, okay, you've done the online training, you've been hearing about these different things, and usually it's not within someone's first week, so they've been able to experience Politico, and we can talk about, okay, hopefully what we told you on day one is what you're seeing. Here are some additional things that we expect of all employees in terms of taking care of each other and being on the lookout and being stewards of our culture. Here's what we expect of managers. And then we ask them, what do you think? Are you seeing these things? What are we missing? What have you learned in either other places with other employers, or for those interns who are coming right out of school, because schools, to be honest with you, are doing a better job of this than we are as employers. What did you learn in school that we could take back? It was actually via those conversations that we first learned about active bystander, and we spend a lot of time now talking to all of our employees about how do you engage for the benefit of that person that you're with. Whether they can take care of themselves or not, you're going to just jump right in and help out. So it's really good conversations, and it's a nice way to say, yes, we've got this baseline, but let's have this conversation as well. And then, as I mentioned before, the other thing that we started doing is the newsroom has always had a great diversity and inclusion group. They call it the Pipeline Committee. They initially started the group looking for how do we get more folks into our newsroom, more diversity into our newsroom. We've since expanded it to the whole organization. We've divided ourselves into two groups, an internal group that's really focused on inclusion, and another group that externally is looking at how do we hire, recruit, and bring in. I will say to my peers at NPR, we have a couple of folks with us who were once with you who have highlighted many of the great programs that you all were doing there. So it lives on even when folks move on. So thanks to that, we're going to borrow some of those ideas. So that's what we've got going on. And there's one more step. You wouldn't think that, oops, this is what happens. Oh, there we go. One more step, right? Just because an employee comes into the organization and yes, we've done this first great quarter, what do we do after that? We consider onboarding something that we are regularly looking at. So what can we do from a manager feedback standpoint? We just this year went to an annual review process. Again, full disclosure, we're not exactly where we need to be with that just yet, but we thought it was a great first step in getting everybody to have a conversation at about the same point in time. And so that's been really important to us. We are also training all of our managers on how to have coaching conversations. We're doing training. The way that we do training at Politico is we do a classroom training the first month of the quarter. We do a roundtable discussion the second month of the quarter to say, how's it going? And then we leave the third month of the quarter for practice. And so we just did difficult conversations, and now we're moving on to development conversations. So this quarter is development conversations. As I mentioned, we do an annual engagement survey and some action planning according with that. You wouldn't think that a newsroom would embrace this, but we had 94% participation across our entire organization. So we've got a lot of feedback to work with, and so we're now in the action planning process. We also use ad hoc surveys occasionally when we feel like we're not getting the right information on a given program. We just rolled out flexible vacation, and we're thinking about doing an ad hoc survey just to make sure that people are using it in the way that it was intended to do.
What is flexible vacation?
So flexible vacation is a derivation of unlimited vacation, because in a newsroom, we didn't think that we could open it up to completely unlimited vacation. But basically what we say is that while there is a floor, everybody has a minimum amount of vacation that we want folks to take because we want to make sure that everybody's got some work-life balance and some time for self-care. There is no upper limit, and so it's left to the manager to determine based on workloads what they can do there. And so we've had great success in some parts of the organization in the newsroom, and other parts it's still a work in progress. What I like to say to folks, it's like when you're learning a new language, you initially translate back to the language you know before you just start talking in that new language. That's where we are. We're still going back to translating to banks and how we use that. But folks, for the most part, are embracing it. Our newsroom's skeptical, but I expected that of them. So it's a work in progress. So we'll do a survey just to help with that. Talked a little about the Diversity and Inclusion Committee, and then also we've got a mentoring network, and it's a volunteer network. We have started it in our business team, so revenue and shared services, with the intention that before the end of the year we will open it up across the organization. And basically, we are pairing managers and senior leaders with less experienced individuals. It's a completely volunteer situation. We've got 2 folks on our team who do learning and development, in addition to some other things that they work on. And so they've got a quarterly newsletter that goes out, some tip sheets that go out. We're going to do, as part of Back to School in September, we're going to do a week of learning. Or cultivating talent, because that's one of our values. And as part of that, we're going to have a panel for this newly created networking mentoring group to just give folks some additional information. So again, what I wanted to leave all of you with was just some practical application in terms of what you all could do. As you'll see, none of what I talked about took more than the resource to do it. The time to really think about what do you want to do from a fundamental standpoint, being really thoughtful about what you do in terms of your policies and your benefits, and then how do you get the organization involved all throughout the process, not just that day one and dump them, but how do you really continue to encourage an employee to feel like you want them to be included. So hopefully that was helpful to you. If there are ever any questions that I can answer for you, feel free to let me know, and I think we've got some time to socialize after.
Right now.
Oh, well, we got time now. All right, I'll sit. I'll sit.
So, questions for Tracy? Over here. Ingrid Cyprian Matthews.
Hey, Tracy. The onboarding practices you've just outlined, are they the same for all employees coming in, entry level, 10-year experience, 15-year experience? Is that the thought process?
Absolutely. So we do, again, we adjust it slightly for interns in that we typically do them as a separate cohort. We start them off of the regular new hire schedule just so that we can give them their own time and attention. They go through all the pieces of that. They just do it as a cohort together. Everyone else travels as a similar cohort. What I will say is if occasionally we have an executive, we might do a one-off for an executive, but anybody else from a executive director to an individual contributor, we do as one cohort because we think there's a benefit to that.
Any other questions? Go ahead.
Sorry. Thank you. Just an anecdote. We have someone who's joining our company and our innovation team. He hasn't yet signed. He got the offer letter like last Friday, and then he spent all of last week with us, the Ignite program. And I think he's pretty fired up. I mean, it's pretty amazing, just the power of meeting a cross-section of the company. I thought, what an amazing, I do hate the word onboarding, hiring or whatever it is, experience. So do you think about how you can give a kind of an impressive, quick cross-section of the company experience so you feel like, wow, I've got the sum of all the parts?
So it's actually a good point, and I didn't mention this. This is a little bit of a work in progress. We tried it. It didn't quite go the way we wanted it to, and so we're reevaluating it. In addition to the first day and some of the other things that we talk about, we do have modules that throughout the month, and we repeat them monthly, where you can go and learn about how the newsroom works or how the revenue team sells. We initially started by just enrolling everybody in all of those, and what we found out was for some new employees that was just information overload. And so what we're trying to figure out now is what pieces or how do we create a menu so that we can do that. As you can imagine, anyone on the business side absolutely wants to know everything they can about the newsroom. So that will be some piece that we will keep. And again, we need to keep it manageable so that our newsroom leaders can do that in addition to all the other things that we ask them to do. But we are trying to figure out with what regularity we'll do the other pieces so that folks can have that understanding.
Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Sherry Williams. I'm the assistant professor in race media and communication at American University. And I just want to say to you and to all the other folks working in the industry, it's really great to know that people are doing so much to really address all the things that have been going on so quickly, the ways that people have been addressing this so quickly. I think is really impressive. So I wanted to say that first. But in an age where trust has been broken so much and it has been fractured in workplaces, I just wonder, is there anything that you're doing differently in the onboarding process, particularly with interns, your one-year fellows, and these entry-level positions to create trust among younger workers who might feel like they might not have so much autonomy when they're coming into a workplace and if something happens?
Yeah, so again, I think for us at Politico, that is the beauty of our model, and one of the reasons why I made sure to give credit to Kat and Juliet, who are sitting there with you. Juliet, who is new to her career as well, I've been doing this 20 some odd years. Juliet is still early in her career, and so she regularly talks to our web producers who are often entry-level folks and our interns. And what we've found is she's more peer-like to them, and so she has a great relationship with them. And so if she sees that somebody's maybe sent a note out on Twitter or in Slack, or she's heard a conversation, she goes and reaches out and says, "How are you doing?" And that has really been a huge benefit for us, because I think one of the things that I heard early on was that somebody said, Tracy, it's great that you're approachable, but coming to the VP of HR is a nuclear option, right? You got to really feel like you've got something serious to come to somebody with a VP title. And so Juliet, who's an HR generalist, is someone that they can approach, and they are very honest with her. And to give Juliet credit, she's done an amazing job to be that resource for them. And so I think, again, with me stepping on my soapbox for just a second, That's why it's important for organizations to invest in those resources for folks. So whether it's NPR that's decided to use the peer approach, whether it's that organizations do invest in HR teams, or whether they train managers, we've got to make sure that employees know that they've got resources all over the organization, because people are going to connect with different people for different reasons.
Last question back here.
It was sort of a two-parter, but I'll just do the one of the two for the sake of time. I'm just curious, there's been a lot of focus on once the person gets on board, and one of the things that I've noticed with tech when they try to recruit is that there's an emphasis before you even get into the company, and that's a resource, ties to resource. But I was just curious at Politico, I love, like, this is a lot of great thought you guys have put into your onboarding. Has there been any thought to before the person is hired, like, but as you think about pipelines and engaging the pipeline, if it makes any sense? Because I think places like Facebook and others, when they really think about their strategy, it's before you get there as well, whether it's in sharing developments of things that are happening with the company, assigning people a specialist who keeps track of you. And I was just curious if that was something that you guys were doing.
Yeah, so I work with the best team ever. I also, in addition to Kat and Juliet and the rest of the business partner team, we have an amazing talent acquisition team who really thinks about those sorts of things. They looked at, okay, where are we going to recruit, right? And as an organization that didn't have a huge recruiting budget, we were going to local colleges and universities, but we had our manager of talent acquisition say, yeah, but we're going to all private institutions. How much diversity are we going to get in a private institution? And so we made sure that we looked at public universities of different sizes, or colleges, or other organizations that we could reach out to. We've done, in a couple of situations, we've done online career fairs when we couldn't afford to get to a place where we might be able to engage with a diverse group of folks. We've engaged with veterans that way a lot. We've also thought about what we do from a social media outreach. My team teaches me every day about social media, and they laugh at me, but they do it in the best way possible. We started a blog where we are just telling people about life at Politico, and what we've noticed is our candidates will say, we read your blog, right? Because we're trying to highlight, one of the things that we struggle with is, because we're a news organization, journalists know about us, but does a salesperson know why it's great to work for Politico? Does an HR person know why it's great to work at Politico? Maybe somebody who isn't part of Politico's target audience, how do they find out about Politico? So that's been really helpful to us. The other thing that we've started thinking about are many of the conversations that a lot of organizations are having. We just recently changed our application to ask folks what their pronoun preference is. How do we continue to make our process as inclusive as possible so that we aren't closing the door on somebody before we even get a chance to meet them?
I just want to say, finally, at a time when HR can be deeply polarizing in companies or distrusted, that all these models today, but especially people like Tracy, really pull the curtains back and show us what good can be. And also, you have a prequel, because when you think about hiring, Carrie Budoff-Brown, the editor of Politico, who was here for the Power Shift Summit, famously told us about a rule that you have, or that she has in hiring. And do you want to kind of restate that?
So for those who may not appreciate this word, I apologize ahead of time, but Carrie has a no assholes rule. And there have been many times where, Kat will have a conversation with her about someone who is not living up to the culture the way we want it to, and she'll say, no assholes rule. And Carrie's like, yep, you're absolutely right. Who do we need to talk to make sure that that person understands about civility in our workplace? So yes, we have the privilege that we get to work with an editor who leads by example every day in her own way. And again, that helps enable a lot of the other things that we're trying to do from a culture standpoint.
You all lead us by example. Thank you for taking part in this today. We're going to be disseminating all of this information through a variety of channels. We encourage you to keep talking to us so that we can keep being a clearinghouse for this here at the PowerShift Project. Engage with us at PowerShift Pro on Twitter, or the Freedom Forum Institute and the Newseum, in any way that you can reach us. We'll keep kicking back out whatever you give us, because I think like we all know, the more information we have, the more knowledge we have, the more we can act on it. So in closing, thank you to everyone for taking time away from their busy day jobs today to come do this. On the other side of the wall is Power Hour with wine and food for those of you who can stay to eat and drink. And please, please keep in touch and keep up the incredible work. Thank you so much.
Thank you.